So I'm sorry if it's disruptive, but
it's not.
Thank you. Well, I want to cover these, especially 3 verses, and of course, 2 of them are from the text that we're in. I just found it fascinating that we get all the way through Peter as he's addressing this idea of suffering and our response to it, and how suffering can be used to affect our world in a positive way and affect our lives in a positive way. And then when he gets done summing all of that up, he comes to chapter 2, verse 8. And it's almost like he's saying, because of all of that, because of all that I just said, this is how we're going to need to respond. This is what we're going to need to do. And Peter is an authority on this, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. So at the very top, your verses from 1 Peter, I want you to fill those in because I don't ever want us to forget these verses. So be sober of spirit, be on the alert, and that means to be very, very attentive, very, almost like in hyperdrive, very, very alert to the deceptions of the enemy. So it isn't that we shouldn't be paying attention to it, we just have to do it correctly. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in the faith. And you know, that phrase right there is huge for us to understand. That's how you resist the devil. And I'm going to say this several times, but I want to say it right here. We are not called to pursue demons and cast them out.
That's right.
We're not called to do that. We are not called to go into the spiritual realm and look for a fight. Our way of resisting Satan is to stand firm in our faith, which is exactly what Peter's been covering all 5 chapters. And I think that there is some verbiage going on out and some movements going on that make us believe that we are supposed to be somehow on the attack. And we are not. He doesn't say anything here about attacking, does he? When he says resist him, that assumes he's going to attack you. You're not going to attack him. That's not in this text. Peter is not saying go after him. And remember, they're surrounded by demonic forces. We're talking about a world where idol worship and pagan stuff is all over. Immorality is prevalent in everything that they do. In the Roman gods, all of it is just supernatural evil that's happening all the time. He never once tells them, go after him. No, he assumes it's going to come after you. You just have to know how to fight it. And you fight it by standing firm in your faith. Right? Not by saying incantations or calling it out or binding it or whatever it is you want. And I'm not saying somewhere there might not be a place for that. I'm just saying he's not calling us to that. That's not what Peter's telling us to do. So we need to be careful with that whole concept, is what I'm saying here. So, but resist him, firm in the faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. Notice again that he ties this idea of Satan's demonic forces working with suffering. That means that when we're in suffering, we're more vulnerable than any other time, right? That's really what he's saying. When you're suffering, you have more, this is what I've got out of 1 Peter. When you're suffering, you have more potential to push back the darkness than ever, but you also have more potential to stumble into it. It's a tentative place, depending on how you respond. That's why Peter spent the whole first 4.5 chapters telling them how to respond when you're suffering. So the next one, and I'm going to, actually I think I'm going to take you somewhere else first because I want you to see the connection here. So I'd like you to look, turn, thank you, to Luke 22. Go to Luke 22. And let's be reminded of why Peter is an authority on this. Remember, Peter just throws out this one verse, tells us what to do. I don't know that there's any disciple that is more familiar with satanic activity than Peter, if you think about it. So let's go to chapter 22, and I'm going to read, and just as a reminder, you know this story, starting in verse 31. And before that, it is Jesus that is talking to them as a group, and he's getting ready to go into Jerusalem to be sacrificed. And they're fighting over who's the greatest. So he's going to have a conversation with them about, I think you guys have that wrong here. I don't think that that's applicable in your position. So then he says, in verse 25, he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, And those who have authority over them are called benefactors, but not so with you. Let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. Then he says, and you are those who stood by me in my trial. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So he's gone through this whole diatribe to tell them who they are. You guys don't need to worry about who's the greatest. You don't need to fight over that. I have made you great because of the position I've given you, but there will be a cost. And immediately, look at immediately what he says. Verse 31. Simon, Simon, this is Peter. Okay, he's given this whole diatribe through the whole thing, and all of a sudden he singles out Peter. Why do you think that is? I would say that it was probably Peter that was instigating the conversation on who was greater. From what we know, Peter, doesn't that sound like something Peter would do? Yeah. Yes, it does. So he immediately turns to Peter. Oh, Simon, Simon. Peter is what he's saying. Behold, Satan has demanded, that word demanded, it means he's insisted. I thought that was interesting. To sift you like wheat. Okay, you're Peter. Huh? What? What does that mean? And I'm zeroing you out, Peter, among all the 12, right? So now remember, there was another time when Peter came and argued with the Lord over whether or not he would actually die. And what did Jesus say to him? Peter's telling him, it's like you're telling Jesus, no, Lord, that's not going to happen to you. He goes, Satan, get behind me, to Peter. So do we think Peter's kind of familiar with the whole satanic activity? Satan is after Peter here. So for him to say, Satan is roaming around like a roaring lion, see, of course Satan, he knew that, just personally, intentionally, he knew what it's like to deal with Satan coming after you. So Peter's warning us of that. Now there's some things, of course, later we're going to have to know about Satan, because I want you to know here, when I believe in this one where it says Satan, but resist him, the adversary, the devil, prowls among the lion, I think that's a corporate concept. When he refers to Satan, when he refers to the adversary here, remember, number one, we have to think logically. Is Satan omnipresent? No. So the likeliness of actually me being face to face with Satan or Cherie being is pretty slim, isn't it? Yeah. So when he says Satan, it can mean all of his demonic forces that work on his behalf, that are his ones that work on toward us. So I want you to remember that. Remember that Satan is not omnipresent, and he is not omniscient, which means he doesn't know everything that we're doing and how we're doing it either. So his tactics have to be a little different. Okay, so then he says, again, verse 32, but I have prayed for you. Wow. Thank you, Lord. That your faith may not fail. So clearly, Satan comes after you, your faith can fail. You know what? I really see this as the difference between Peter and Judas. Because Judas's faith failed. Whatever it was, it didn't pan out. Peter had been prayed for by Christ specifically for a purpose, obviously. Again, we see the sovereignty of God at work in the lives of these people. And you, once you have turned again, meaning you will, you're going to turn again, strengthen your brothers. So in other words, to me what that's saying is because of your face-to-face understanding of what Satan has done in your life, you use that to strengthen other people who may not have faced him quite so closely. So Peter is somewhat of an authority on what Satan can do in your life and how he can take you out. Of course, again, we notice Peter's response is, and he said to him, Lord, with you I'm ready to both go to prison and to death. And Jesus says, oh, seriously, Peter? See, this is why, Peter, you're such easy prey for Satan. It's because you got these things going on inside you. And that's why, no wonder Satan asked, remember, Satan asked specifically for Peter. Can you see why? First of all, he obviously was called to be something very, very specific in God's plan of administering the gospel to the world. And secondly, he's an idiot. He's like me. He's just like, woo, let's let's just respond and react, and you know, this is just the way I think, so I'm just going to say it. I did that for years. I'm a little more careful now. I've eliminated one or two things. I'm still an idiot when it comes to that kind of stuff. But you can see why Satan would go, okay, give me Peter. Just give me Peter for a while. And let's see what I can do. Okay, I have a whole sidebar on that, but I can't do that because I'm going to be behind as it is. In thinking about what Satan was thinking, really, really think about it. It's illogical. Why would Satan think that if I get Peter, I can cause him to, when he's under Jesus' protection? I'm thinking, do you not know? I mean, really, look what Satan's attack on Peter did. It made him one of the most powerful men in the whole world as far as the gospel is concerned. So, like, counterproductive here, Satan. You should probably think this through a little better. But to him, it made sense because of Peter's weaknesses. And it will make sense to him on our weaknesses, too. And that's where we want to go. Okay, so the next one. Remember, I can't go into them. I'd like to go to all these verses. But remember that in that has Satan tempted Peter. Satan used Peter, as I said, to rebuke Jesus. Satan entered Judas. Satan thwarted Paul when he was supposed to go someplace, and he thwarted them going there. Satan gave Paul a thorn in the flesh. He said specifically, this is a thing of Satan. Satan gave me this thorn in the flesh. And God said, you know what, I'm going to let you keep it. I'm going to use it. So Satan, obviously, was very active in the disciples at this particular point in time. And again, we know that when it says Satan, all of the demonic things that they were dealing with, as far as casting out demons, that was also Satan's realm as well. They're obviously, Satan goes after big guns, right? Definitely goes after big guns. So, and then of course Satan tempted Christ himself right to his face. So that's some of the things we need to be aware of what he does do himself in contrast to the people that they cast demons out of. Satan was obviously, that's part of his realm, but he was not himself indwelling those people. His demons were. So the next one is 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, and I'm going to make a point from all of these eventually, and I better do it fast. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. Then what are they? Well, they're divinely powerful. Wow. We have weapons that are divinely powerful. For the destruction of fortresses. Okay, those are definitely war tactics where I'm going to be taking down these highly fortified castles that have been reinforced to keep me out, right? And I'm going to tear them down. So we have to think on those terms. We are destroying speculations. There's an interesting word. And every lofty thing raised against the knowledge of God. Here's that, stand firm in your faith again. Our deal is we're fighting against people who are believing lies. We're not demon chasers. We're fighting lies with the truth. That's our spiritual warfare. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Now, what that tells us right there is that the biggest percentage of spiritual warfare goes on in the mind. Because all of those words are mind words. Those are things that take place. Speculations, we're going to go into that here in just a minute. Those are all things that take place in the mind. So for us to go, and I was just thinking, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen. So I'm just expressing to you what I'm trying to logically think through when it comes to demonic warfare. So if I thought Susan had a demon, sometimes I'm cheating. And I was to say, okay, I'm going to call that demon out, right? First of all, demon, I want you to give me your name. Have you ever heard that happening?
Yes, in Scripture.
Okay. Yes. First of all, number one, and then they might say, and we said in Scripture that it actually did happen. He gave a name to Jesus, right?
Yep.
To Jesus. And he did that once. Yep. So this does not mean it has to happen this way every time. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Logically, we need to go, well, just because Jesus did it doesn't mean it's our approach to doing it. But then I've seen this actually happen where they start talking with the demon, right? Getting information from the demon as to who's in there, what are you doing, what's your name, what's all that kind of stuff, what kind of influences do you have. Okay, my first problem is, Satan is a what?
Deceiver.
He's a deceiver. Why would I expect that voice coming back to me to be telling me the truth?
Exactly. No way. Don't engage.
No. Seriously, clearly they had to tell Jesus the truth, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right.
But do they have to tell me the truth? No. So I would be hesitant immediately as I started getting this information that I can actually use this information against them. I don't know how we're supposed to do that because they're deceivers.
Well, and how can you can't confirm that?
No.
That whatever they say.
No.
So
there's
like,
you're just assuming they're telling me the truth.
Yeah.
That's good. Wow.
And all I'm doing here is bringing some logical thought. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying anybody who did it wasn't. I'm just saying when I logically think about that, I'm going to go, okay, wait a minute. He says his name's Joe. I'll bet it's Tim. He says he's here for this reason. I'll bet he's there for another reason. Because really the chances of them telling you the truth are pretty slim. Anyway, those are just thoughts that I have about that. So it's definitely a mind deal. It's a mind, thought, truth, lie process here that is demonic. And we're gonna focus on that. Maybe like 4 hours from now. I gotta bring that. Okay, so for now the Ephesians, for our struggle, meaning our fight, our battle, is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness. So we fight wickedness. Okay, clearly in Peter. How do we learn that you fight wickedness? How do you push back the dark? With the truth and righteousness, right? Okay, you don't confront them and tell them that they're liars because they know that.
Yeah.
We do it with righteousness and truth and light. That's how we push back the dark. Therefore, take up the full armor of God that you may be able to stand in the evil day. You're not attacking, you're standing. And having done everything, to stand firm. Don't move, which is exactly what he says about but resist him, how? Firm in the faith. Stand firm in the faith. All right, so now we're going to get to the lecture. And I have like 10 minutes.
In verse 14, that's how it starts. Then it says, stand, therefore. So it's like he keeps saying,
just stand. And that has to happen by faith, not by pursuing some kind of a battle with an enemy. Okay, so let's go down to number 1. Let's identify the real enemy here then. From these verses, and from many of the Greek terms that go with them, which, by the way, when Jesus told Peter, Satan is asked to sift you like wheat, that word means to shake, to agitate, and prove by trials and difficulties.
Suffering.
Yeah, suffering. That's one of Satan's tactics, to get us to shake our faith. That's why Peter says, don't let it shake you. Go back to the basics of what you know to be true about your faith. Don't respond to the ones that are your enemies. Don't fight them. Stand firm in your faith. That power. Now I tried to do this with the leaders too, and that power, guys, resists the dark in itself. We do not actively fight. We stand firm in our faith and in righteousness and truth, that with the behavior that comes from that resists the dark, not us. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's what we need to remember. We do not pursue ourselves actively engaging an enemy. Our righteousness and our light and the life of Christ in us does that on our behalf. That's why Peter said, you gotta go back to the basics of your faith. You gotta go back to remembering who you are. You gotta go back to righteous living. You gotta go back to loving each other and caring about each other. Don't let them accuse you of being evil and have it be true. If you're going to suffer for righteousness, not for evil. That's what he's saying. That alone, the righteousness alone, will conquer the dark. That is what it means to believe God. That's what it means to stand in faith. Is it, okay, God, I believed you. I have done righteous behavior to the best of my ability. I have obeyed you to the best of my ability. We won't always do it right, but he knows our heart. That in itself will, and I stand, and you can just stand and watch it. Let him do it. Let him do it. He's the one who's going to fight that fight with that enemy, not you, not me. Because righteousness pushes back the dark. That's what it does. It isn't us. That's why he keeps saying, just stand firm in your faith and it will do the job. We don't necessarily want to settle for that, though. Okay, so the real enemy is, according to those words, ideologies or thought processes that oppose true knowledge of God. That's what it says in the 2 Corinthians. We are destroying speculations. Those are thought processes. And every lofty thing raised against the knowledge of God. And what are we taking captive? Our thoughts. It's all a thought process. It's all what goes on in our head. This is why it's so important that you remember what we talked about when it comes to worldview. Because our thought processes have been distorted to this worldview, and now we're fighting on Satan's terms instead of God's terms, because we're deceived as to what actually takes that enemy out. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
This is scary, that we're this clueless. It's scary to me. Anyway. Okay, so the real enemy, number one, he says, isn't the adversary, it's the devil. And I want you to see that it's not people, it's not circumstances, it's not political forces on earth like today. We are not battling presidential candidates. We are battling spiritual forces in the heavenlies that are bringing Satan's world, that are working in Satan's world to bring evil to the minds of those who lead us. And deceiving them into the lies. Our whole world is deceived by it. We are too. We've been sucked in. And we want to take these thoughts captive. We want to, okay, wait a minute. I want a right thought process going on here. Okay, on B, the other part of the enemy is spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. That would be demonic activity. Notice it's in the heavenly places, but whose realm is this? This is Satan's realm. He has every right to bring whatever power he wants of evil onto the, because God's let him. He stepped back and said, okay, this is your realm. But my people will oppose you with my righteousness.
Wow.
That's what he's saying. You still can't get past my righteousness, Satan, if my people will walk in it. If my people walk in the light, Satan, you're doomed. Because it's still the most powerful force that there is against him. Our problem is, how do we do that? And how do we make sure that we're not being deceived as to what that looks like? All right, so then we have those spiritual forces come, according to that verse, in fortresses. And that fortress means it's literally a fortification, metaphorically of any strong idea or argument in which one trusts. It's thought processes in our mind that we have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Brainwashed by being in this world as long as we have to believe, to mold our thinking to make us believe it's true. It's kind of like propaganda, right? Isn't that what propaganda does? Is it tries to manipulate our thinking. That's what Satan has done. Let's manipulate their thinking. You know what? I think we are more susceptible of this in America than any country on earth. He's definitely made it a mind game, hasn't he? And then you add technology on it, and oh my gosh, we are insane. Okay, so any kind of thought processes in which we trust in to determine our truth. And he says those processes can be raised against the knowledge of God. And it is the true knowledge of God that enables us to fight the battle. So if we've been deceived about the knowledge of God, that's why we're here, then we will lose the battle. Because that's where it takes place. All right, so then the next one is speculations. That word speculations means calculations or considerations. Again, mind processes. A reflection or consideration preceding the determining conduct. This is horrible because I hate this. This gets me every time. Mind processes that bring us to a conclusion. Do you know how many times I've gotten up to get dressed, and preceding my getting dressed, I think, okay, they're going to think I'm fat. They're going to think I'm ugly. Anybody here do that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Thought processes have preceded my action. So now, that process is determining all my ideas about how I have to prepare to come out here and do this. I've been deceived just like that. Sucked into a thought process that encourages wrong behavior. Definitely isn't love, right? It's definitely not humility. It's a, oh my gosh, I don't want to look fat. And I'm just taking a really stupid, basic concept that most of us here struggle with. And the reality of it is a lot of what we do is manipulated by those kinds of thoughts. How do we ever have honest and true and powerful relationships of humility with each other? That's where our thought processes take us before we even get together. And our world encourages that.
So we have a huge preconceived idea before we ever start.
Absolutely. And we destroy each other by those speculations. Because you see, I can't love you well if I'm concerned about how you think about me. If that's my concern, then I'm not really thinking about you. Who am I thinking about?
Yourself.
Me.
Yeah.
That's a speculation in my mind, and that's a very innocent one. Well, we have to go on to way bigger ones than that. But that's one that every one of us here can relate to, because we as women get sucked into that one so bad it makes me throw up. Yes?
No,
You look like you want to say something.
I was just
Okay.
listening.
Okay. And we're passing it on to the next generation. Okay. The next thing that is spiritual forces are lofty things. And those are raised up against the knowledge of God. And those are the speculations that we make that become lofty in our mind and now control our actions. Because we've raised them up above the truth, and now we're responding to the lofty ideas instead of the truth. And that is that are raised up in our mind that stand against God. You know what? We have just lied to ourselves. I've lied to myself when I do that. And I've said he's a liar. Because he says I'm perfect just the way I am. He says I'm complete. He's made me, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm lacking no good thing. So I'm saying, God, you're a liar. I'm sure that you've given me a lot of good stuff, but you made me fat. So you kind of screwed up on this. But and remember, fat is subjective, right? Yes. How many of you right now are thinking, she's not fat? Exactly. But see, in my mind, that's it. It always has been. My whole life I felt that.
So it's a lie.
It's a lie, right from the pit of hell. Those are the innocent things that Satan can use against us. Just think about the big things. The lofty things in our mind. And I just use that because there's not anybody here who can't relate to that in some way, shape, or form.
And that's just the physical.
That's just the physical, exactly. All right, so then the number 2 is then we identify the real enemy. Number 2 is we prepare for the battle. And we are armed for victory. We have been given the armor of God. Remember, that's the whole, if you continue on in Ephesians, we've given everything necessary for life and godliness. We do not lack any good things to protect us from the enemy's tools. Because we have the truth, we have the life. He is defeated in our life. Seriously, guys, you can tell him, get out. You have no place here. And neither do your lies. Because of who Jesus is in me. And sometimes I've actually said it, you really think, Satan, you want to face him? You might be thinking you're facing me, but you're not. You can crush me in a second. You're facing my Savior. You sure you want to do that? No. Because he's already conquered you once. You know what? Satan believes that. Satan knows that. I have to believe it. I have to stand in it. Because if I don't believe it, he's got his demonic force and all the reasons and forces they need to work against me. Because the lie becomes now the lofty thing that I'm responding to. Wow. I'm an idiot. And I get it. But I'm a lovable idiot. Yeah. He loves me anyway. So that's good.
Makes us realize how good at this Satan really is.
He really is. This is his area. And we are so radically in the flesh that he's got easy prey. All right, so how do we prepare? Peter says we stay strong in our personal faith. We remember when we started 1 Peter, the first thing that Peter taught us. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, this is verse 3 of chapter 1, who according to his great mercy has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to obtain an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled, will not fade away, received in heaven for you, who are protected by the power of God through faith for the salvation ready to be revealed at the last time.
Wow.
So what's our weakness? Our flesh is our weakness, right? Because that's what he first said. You got to go back to the God. You got to go back to the truth. Because this is where Satan's going to get you. These lofty things in your head. These speculations that he's going to lie to you about that you're going to get into. Peter goes right back to it. So strong in the faith, that's what he means. And remember that he says that on that verse we have, that you do that by resist him firm in the faith. That's how you resist him. Now, and the second one is competency in the truth. In chapter 6 of Ephesians, I didn't put it on your notes, but the very next verse after he says we don't fight against flesh and blood, he says when he starts to give the armor, the first thing he gives in verse 14 is stand firm then.
Oh,
Woo, there we go again. This is Paul. Having girded your loins with the truth. That's your first defense. Gird your loins with the truth, because that's the first place you're going to fall. If you fall there, the rest of the armor is not going to really matter. So he goes on. The competency in the truth is the first thing we have to put on. That's why we're here. And C, according to Peter in 1 Peter 5:8, is a self-controlled mind. And that's what it means by be sober in spirit. It means be aware, be smart, be intelligent about your enemy. That's what that means. So, be self-controlled in your mind. And then 2 Corinthians 10:5, of course, the verse that I gave you there, is we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. We have to have self-disciplined minds, because that's where he's coming at us. And you know what, ladies, I hope from now on, like me, you'll go home, and when you start saying those lies in your head, you say, wait a minute. That's a doggone lie. Lord, forgive me, because I have just said something that is not true. Even if it's about me. And even if I still feel like it's true, you still just feel bad. Yeah, I do. Doesn't mean it is true, right? And even if it is true, is that who I am? No. So let's be accurate on our assessment of what God thinks of us. He's not worried about our shape. I can guarantee you that. And neither should we, other than health issues. All right, the third thing is we need to identify the tactics that he uses. Okay, so we know it's in the mind, and we know what we have to do to stand against it. And this is why I was telling you that I want you to consider, we've looked at Peter and recognized that Peter had some issues that Satan just jumped on. Right? His own personality was why Satan went after him. His own personality was his biggest enemy. He was so susceptible because of this radical, passionate, undisciplined thinking, self-confidence that he had, and yet that passion was wonderful. Christ just needed to change it to where it was directed toward the right thing, is all he had to do. So there's nothing wrong with passion. And there's nothing wrong with our personalities. It's just that Satan has used them for his own tools. We need to shift it to where God can use that personality, like Cherie said last week, for the gifts, so he can use us for who we are. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We get deceived even on that. Okay, so what are some of the tactics? And I just thought immediately of some of them that I know in my mind that go crazy and that are validated in Scripture. So the first one is doubt. Anybody here ever second guess themselves? Or doubt that maybe God's even got time for me, or listening to me, or that he is who he says he is, or that this is not just a bunch of bunk? Yeah, Satan's going to, and remember when I say Satan, I'm talking about his forces. I think Satan's got bigger fish to fry than me. So, and we can see that he pretty much stuck with those ones that were going to have the greatest impact of the gospel that he wanted to bring down, like Peter, Paul, Jesus. Those are the ones we see that he actually showed up in their life. The rest of it was demonic forces that were influencing what they were doing. So, when I see that, I think James 1 says, Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you what? Encounter various trials. He thinks the same way Peter does. Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. In other words, if you lack the wisdom on how to respond to the influx of satanic things that are being worked against you through suffering, right? That's what he's talking about. Suffering is going to do crazy things to your head and everything else. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all men generously without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, without any doubting. So in other words, when I ask for wisdom, for the suffering to endure whatever it is, to respond to it correctly, you know what? I better be believing I've got it. Because that's what he does. Because when we say things like, I don't know, God just didn't give me any direction, or he didn't answer my prayer, that's blasphemy, guys. Now we've called him a liar. It's no longer that we just didn't hear it, or we didn't pay attention, or we weren't doing what we're supposed to. It's his fault. You need to be careful about that, because that's one of Satan's major tools. He wants you to distort the person of God in your mind, because he's your greatest ally. So we've got to get rid of the ally in order to undermine what's left. You get what I'm saying? So, doubt. Don't doubt. If you ask him and he said he would do it, then assume you've been given it and start looking for it. And it probably won't come the way you think it's going to. But we need to be wise enough to identify it despite what we're feeling, right? So that's really important. The next one, and I really liked this Old Testament passage, is fear. I don't know about you, but I went to, I was telling some of you earlier that I went to vote this morning, and when I had to sign my name, I was shaking. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm shaking. And she said, oh, you're so excited to vote. And I said, no, I'm scared to death. She said, you and everybody else in here. So it's like, fear is, I mean, don't we all vacillate? For 1 minute, I'm like, okay, yeah, God's in control of this. Then I turn the news on and go, oh no, we're doomed. You know, we go back and forth on that one. But remember, the main verse of one of these is that what casts out fear? Perfect love. So obviously, if we're fearful, we are not understanding God's love for us. That's how we should deal with it. Do you know what I mean? We should identify that we're fearful, but identify the right answer to that. Not just that we get crazy or even that we condemn ourselves and say, I shouldn't be fearful. No, it's like, okay, no, wait a minute, Lord, I need to think about your love to calm my fear. Because you know, Satan's going to run away from that with everything he's got. So, Proverbs 29:25 says this, pretty simple. An arrogant man stirs up strife, but he who, I'm sorry, there's 29. No, wrong one. 29, I'm in 28. 25. The fear of man brings a snare. Wow, is that just exactly what we're talking about? My fear, what you might think of me, is a trap for me. And it is for you as well. We set ourselves up in a trap. Is that stupid? Yes. Is that illogical? Yes. But that's how he works in our mind. That's how he takes our thoughts and causes them to go way off. And most of that, it doesn't even have to be a demonic force. It's there. It just uses our flesh. Remember, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life? Automatically we're set up to think wrong thoughts. So that's why we have to be alert, we have to be sober, we have to be aware of our own weaknesses. Peter probably learned that, didn't he? Eventually, he probably went, oh my goodness, I'm my worst enemy. So, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. Fear. The next one is pride. Proverbs 16, and of course there's other verses there as well. And we talked about humility today. But you know, I think that, again, we talked in Karen's group today about the definition of humility, and I don't really think the antonym for humility is pride. It's independence. I believe the antonym for humility is independence. Because, see, Christ had nothing to think less of himself for. He was perfectly established in who he was. But what he did do in order to be humble is he let go of his independence and became completely dependent on the Father. That is humility. Understanding who our resource is and that we are not it. That's humility. Okay, what was it? 16:18. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. I think Christ modeled that, didn't he? That's why we're wondering, everybody's wondering, why didn't he come as an earthly king that just conquered everybody? Why did he come as a meek and mild little baby who really just said nothing when he was accused? Because it's better to be with the lowly. He understood his position. It wasn't that he felt he was inferior at all. Christ knew he was not inferior. He just knew where his power source was. That's humility. The next one is deceptions, misconceptions, and expectations. And that is huge for us as women. We are easily deceived. We misconceive things all the time, don't we? How many times have you been in a fight with your husband and he'll finally go, I never said that. Oh, yes, you did. No, I didn't. Because we have misconceived what he said and in our own mind built up a lofty place and said, oh, yeah, this is what he meant. Yowza. Wow, Satan can really use us on that one. You know what? Even if he did mean it, we don't have to respond to it. Because remember, that's why Christ was silent. He could just not say anything. And your flesh is going, that's not happening. He needs to know, right? He needs to know he's not being. No, and then we have expectations. Wow, I think this is really one of the biggest ones. Kelly and I have had numerous discussions on the deceptions of expectations. Wow, I can say I set myself up for that several weeks ago because after I finished my radiation, I haven't been able to eat for over a month. And I'm thinking, okay, the first week's supposed to be work, so 7 days to the day after I'm done, I should be fine. So 7 days after the day, what did I do? I tried to eat. And I just plummeted into depression because it was disgusting. And I'm like, I had an expectation that I was going to be better. I still do. I still have trouble. I'm 3 weeks later, I'm still waiting. But that's because I had an expectation of something different. And every time I take a bite of food, I have an expectation it's going to taste good this time. And then I get depressed when it doesn't. I set myself up for failure. We do that a lot. We have expectations, and I wish I could bring Brandy up here right now, because if anybody has learned a really hard lesson about expectations, it's her and Bethany. Bethany, whose 6-year-old daughter had cancer. They had all kinds of plans. They had all kinds of things that were going to happen because it was the godly thing to do. They were responding to what would God want. This is what we're going to do. None of it worked out. And every time it didn't, she, like me with my food, got discouraged, right? Because there was an expectation. Instead of, God, you make the plans. And yes, it's disappointing, but I'm not going to assume you're going to do it a certain way. Satan totally uses that in our head. All right, then the last one is cultural compromises. And that's really the issue here, which is what Peter addresses throughout his book. And if you remember that, we go back to 1 Peter 3, he says, but even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. Do not fear their intimidations. Do not fear the cultural expectations, and do not be troubled, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you with gentleness and reverence, and keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. Don't let cultural influences or pressure cause us to conform. And we will do that especially if we feel those cultural influences are going to hurt us, which is what they were doing in Peter, right? If I say the right thing, we were just talking about that too long ago. Brandy watching some of these court shows, and really how many people will, after so many hours of intimidation, will finally just confess to a crime they didn't do?
Yeah.
Because they're intimidated. They're totally intimidated. And everybody will go, no way. There's no way that I would ever admit to doing something I didn't do. Well, yes, you will. Because you see, I fold to cultural expectations when I know those cultural expectations are wrong, and I still do it. So tell me we won't do it. Yes, we will. We do it every day. We have to get to a place where we think biblically about suffering, because that's the first place that Satan will use to bring intimidation into our life, and all of these, and satanic influence. You need to think rightly about that. What is your place? What is the place in your mind? I shared some of mine. And we see those: doubt, fear, pride, deceptions, and cultural compromises, misconceptions, expectations. What are the places in your mind where spiritual forces immediately bring pressure upon your thinking and cause you to distort away from the truth? You know, we as women do it all the time. Men do it too, but we're only talking about us. Right? And our goal is to take those thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ, so that the darkness can be defeated because of that. Not because we go chase after it, or because we go, in Jesus' name, get out. No, my righteousness in Jesus' name causes him to flee. That's how I resist him. Crazy. It's just crazy, the things that we think and that we're definitely deceived by. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we right now want to declare that we need you. In complete humility of knowing we have this feigned independence, or this feigned self ability that is just so ridiculous, and we even know it's ridiculous, and yet we do it anyway. I pray by your Holy Spirit that today you will refresh our minds, renew our thinking, strengthen our thought process to where we think truth. And then we can stand in it when those lies come against us. We have a lot of work to do, because we have been propagandized to the nth degree, and we have believed the lies. And we want to tear down those fortresses so that your power, your spirit, your truth, your righteousness can shine and defeat the darkness. In Jesus' name, amen.